Hey, good morning. So I was watching a video here, and it's on the Graham Stephan show on YouTube, of course. And the question really came about, and I wanted to address this question on tipping. And he's really quoting Dave Ramsey's rule on tipping, which I thought was kind of fascinating or interesting. And a lot of it, in Dave Ramsey, he talks about, well, if it's a service provided event or thing, whereas like valet parking, or if you're going to a expensive or fancy restaurant or something like that, and then you do want to definitely tip, is Dave Ramsey's point, where if he says he's eating at McDonald's or a fast food restaurant, something like that, tipping becomes less of a expectation, certainly less of a thing if it's more of a, hey, you order, sit down, whatever, get your food. This isn't some, I don't eat out a whole lot. Certainly I don't have any car worth being valet parked. So it's not exactly like I'm in a position where I do a lot of things where I would worry about tipping. But my philosophy would be based on looking at a person's situation. So for the rule of thumb on tipping, I don't believe there is a rule of thumb. I don't think there should be a rule of thumb. So that's my question. My question is, what are your thoughts on tipping? What do you think? And from a financial standpoint, I do believe a person has to look at what service they're getting at. Certainly, where if you are going to a nice restaurant, okay, fine. But also think about your own financial situation. Are you employed? Are you in a situation where you are working full time, having a decent sized income? And really, from there, that's what you would base your tip on, because people's situations are different. Certainly, one of the cases being, we do think about restaurants, and we think about 15%, and we think of this standardization. Well, if you think about a lot of people who eat out, they're not always super high income people. You might have someone who is, a college student who is going to some event or some gathering, or maybe they have a class gathering, or with their team of, interns, if they're doing an internship, and maybe they're having some dinner party or dinner event. And certainly then the pressure is like, oh my goodness, I don't want to look bad. I don't want to tip low. But at the same time, you're thinking, I make 10 an hour, I make 15 an hour, I don't make a lot of money, and now I need to go and tip someone $5, $10, which would be, a third or half of my hourly take home pay. And that's really what I kind of look at too. How much of your take home pay is this tip? If you make 15 an hour and you tip someone $15, that's a whole hour pay. Whereas if you tip someone $15 and you're making 30 an hour, that's a very, very different thing. And I think those things really, really need to be considered too. Um, Case in point, at a certain time when I was between jobs, I went out with a couple buddies, and I think my ticket was about $15, because that was one of the lesser expensive things just on the menu. It wasn't, it was a basic, typical restaurant that you would order off a menu, and I believe I tipped $3, and they kind of looked like, oh, you're only gonna tip $3. And I said, well, yeah, at this point, I'm going to tip $3. And then the question really became, well, if someone is only going to tip $3 because that's what they can afford, would the question then be, well, then they can't afford to go out and eat at all, and they shouldn't go out to eat? And certainly, if you budgeted for that, can you budget to go out to eat, but not necessarily budget for a $15, $20 tip? And that's a real question. I'll give an example of when I tipped, where, because I think tipping should not necessarily be categorically left to what we culturally think are our acceptable places to tip. For example, the biggest tip I ever gave anyone in my life, I gave them, I want to say it was $40, 40, and it was for a dog that we had bought. Our beautiful dog Etta. We love our chocolate lab Etta, and we had gone in. Of course, I'm in Iowa, and we had gone down to Missouri to go and get Etta, and she was the last dog. She was a chocolate lab, of course, and she was the last dog to be sold. Okay, so all the other puppies in this litter, I think there were 5 or 6, and they had all been sold So she was the last one, and the breeder actually held on to her for us. He had opportunities. He could have gotten her sold to someone local. He could have, made that money in hand. And of course, we had put a deposit on her, right? This is a small deposit, so they would, hold the dog for us. But I think at this point, it was a situation where, we were traveling out of state. We wanted to make sure it was right. They did a great job. They were in constant communication. And one thing that the breeder did that we absolutely loved is he would send pictures of this dog, this little puppy. He would send pictures of the puppy, and he was constantly in communication. And oh my goodness, it was so cool seeing this puppy that you were going to get. And then you would get, every other day you would get a picture. Here's what she's doing now. Here's what Edda's doing. Of course, her name wasn't Edda at the time, but I was thinking, this is amazing. Not only is he holding the dog for us, not only is he being honest with that, but he's also sending us pictures and updates on how she's doing. Like, that's spectacular. So I wanted to go and tip the breeder in that situation because that was something above and beyond. And financially, I was at a point that I could do that based on the job situation. And kind of like what I talked about in my other video about buying and renting homes, one of the big things is, we think of a person that's, when asking how much money do you make per year? Do you make 40,000, 70,000, 90, 100,000? Well, for a lot of people, again, that number fluctuates. It's not a static number. It's dynamic, especially people who are in industries where they're on commission, they're on maybe a base plus commission, or they're seasonal workers, temporary workers. Maybe they run or own their own business, based on, and so they're very, very susceptible to market fluctuations. Okay, so for a lot of these people, when you say like, okay, what's your income? They don't know, and certainly there's a difference between someone who tips $10 that's making 40,000 a year versus someone who's making $60,000 or $70,000 tipping $10. But then do we go and say, well, yes, while people should go and budget and eat out less, certainly you should do that. And while we were working to pay off our house, we ate out less. But do you get to the point where you say that, well, if you cannot afford a $10 tip on, say, a $15 or $20 meal, that you never go out to eat? And I think that's a little bit extreme. So if someone can tip $1, and I know for in high school, when I was in high school and college, and I was making $6 an hour, I would tip $1. That's what I did. $1. Here's a dollar. And from my point of view, that represented a decent amount of money. A poor college kid driving a 20-year-old car who's going to be drowned in student loan debt, and then the expectation that they go and give a big tip. But then you also say that, well, they can never go out to social gatherings and order out the menu, or you just have to drink water at those social gatherings, because a lot of our social gatherings revolve around going to restaurants and places where you would traditionally leave a tip. So these are things to think about too. One other thing I want to highlight with this as well would be, in looking at the culture, a lot of restaurants, especially now, will go and automatically add fees. And I know the Graham Stephan video, or Stefan, pardon the pronunciation on there, he talked about that and how a lot of these restaurants will actually go and add fees or put the tip on there. So the question then would be, what do you think about that? Feel free to leave that in the comments. Feel free to start a discussion on that. But do you believe that tips should be mandatory? Do you believe they should, such as I do, fluctuate based upon a person's situation? If you can give $1, give $1. If you can give 10, give 10. Or do you believe they should be set, and a tip is 15%, and it's basic math? So whatever your bill is, you take 15%, and that's what you give, no more, no less. Is that kind of what you believe too? So look forward to hearing the comments. Again, I've just kind of touched on this topic, and I imagine this would be a topic that's going to become a bigger question as we become more of a service-based society. And what I mean by that is, not only are we going out to eat, but we have DoorDash, Grubhub, things like that. People are delivering services and food to us. companies like Walmart are getting into the online home delivery, and certainly the Walmart drivers, there's I believe an option to tip them too. Um, so it's something where I think we're having a lot more avenues and a lot more transactions in which we're doing business where the expectation or the opportunity to provide a tip is certainly there. So again, what are your thoughts on tipping? I've kind of shared my thoughts and some examples. An example of when I gave a very small tip because at $3, that's really all I was able to afford, and an example where I gave a very, very large tip in getting my chocolate lab Etta in a non-traditional transaction, non-traditional in terms of the expectation of a tip with that transaction. So yeah, so let me know what you think in the comments and have a great day.